I love studying the effect of people, culture, and society, and the effect design has on it, because I think design is probably, I'd even venture to say, it's probably one of the most influential aspects of the world on society. It far more than actually we even realize. So there's lots of components that make up the sort of factors that contribute to this. So let's have a look at them. First off, these are two phrases that you need to know very clearly what they mean: technology push and market pull. And I've put here like AKA what causes things to be invented. So, very crudely, technology push. What this means is something has been invented, something has been um, released into the market because something new has been invented. A good example is, say, I don't know, that's the Wright brothers aeroplane. Now, okay, it's a highly out of date example, but it's I think it's still very relevant. I mean, the Wright brothers, they were obsessed with flight and understanding how it could work, and it wasn't. You could argue that it wasn't exactly like people were clamoring, saying what we really need is controlled direction based flights. So we need to be able to fly over seas and over land so we can get very quickly from A to B. It wasn't like these guys were doing it because of that. They did it just because of their scientific curiosity and interest. This is what you got to think about, is like, when we look at certain inventions in history, it's really important we think about, like, so what was the driving force behind that? Why, say the famous inventor that came up with it, why did they even come up with it? Why did they conceive it? What really was their motivation? What was their motive behind doing this? And it comes down to a few things, really. I mean, sometimes these people, they literally do just have an absolute obsession with, technology and inventing stuff, and and it's just a hobby. And then by happy chance, they suddenly make something revolutionary, like, oh, that's pretty cool. Or as people really want to make a load of money and they identify a gap in the market and they're like, oh, right, that's a little opportunity there. Right, I'm going to fill that gap in the market by designing something, and then they try and make a lot of money off it. Sometimes things are designed because of suddenly a desperate need in the market. I mean, COVID is a clear example of that. I mean, the ultimate example of market pull is the vaccinations that were developed for COVID. It wasn't like before COVID came about that the pharmaceutical companies were thinking, you know what we should do? We need a vaccine for like any sort of respiratory based illness. That wasn't the case. Like, they, COVID came along, and then there was suddenly this panic, and the world was clamoring for a vaccination. So all the pharmaceutical companies were then put into developing an effective vaccine, and that's a great example of market pull, because it's like society was saying, we need this. Someone needs to design this and make it work. And so, yeah, the result of that is that there were various vaccines developed. Now, technology push, on the other hand, is, something is invented, and then those people that invent it is trying to then say, hey guys, look what I've invented. this is awesome. Like, you definitely want one of these. Like, this is going to be really cool. Great example of this, if not the first powered flight, is probably like the first iPhone, like the iPhone first gen. I mean, Apple's premise behind that was designing an iPod, an internet browsing capability, and a communicating device all into one package, and they called that the iPhone. Yeah, it wasn't like people were saying to them, you know what we really need, Apple? You need to design a device that can communicate, can browse the internet, can listen to music. That wasn't their premise. They identified that as an opportunity. They were like, right, well, let's develop the tech that can do that, and then we'll release it. Some inventions flop, some tech push flops. I mean, arguably, I personally would argue that things like hoverboards and segways and stuff are market flops, because they've failed to really capture the market. They tend to be things that are bought by a very, very small number of people. And segways now, I mean, I don't think I've ever really seen someone using a segway for their own personal transportation. I mean, I think the only times I've seen segways being used is in a sort of tourist capacity, where there's like if you go to a city somewhere, they advertise Segway tours around the city, and you join a group, and the whole sort of novelty is it's all done on a Segway, but it's all done very sort of like as a novelty thing, and it's but that is so not what Segway would have envisaged for their products. They would have envisaged this revolutionizing transportation device that will suddenly mean cars will be off the roads and people will be zooming around on these lovely, clean, empty streets with just like little Segway personal transportation devices. And I should probably put a picture of a Segway on here actually, if you guys are not familiar with what they are. Yeah, I mean, and these come in all sorts of shapes and forms and sizes now. But yeah, I mean, like this is a great example. Yeah, here we go. Like, so a couple on here, like, and clearly they're part of a tour because they've got these like little like lanyards around their necks and stuff. So yeah, it's not like people use them for the novelty of them. It's not like these guys are then going to go home and say, oh, that Segway, we should get those. Like, they're really cool. Like, and it's weird. It's like it's a great example of a really actually very innovative piece of technology that just has failed to deliver. Like, it's just failed to bite the market. Yeah, so that's really good example. So just being fluent with being able to analyze products in terms of whether they were invented because of market pull or technology push. It's a great example. This image here is is one of the first vacuum cleaners developed. Now, it's a questionable argument is, was that invented because there was a demand for people to be able to clean houses quicker and more effectively. And some guys suddenly found that, like, you can use employ a vacuum system to actually suck the dirt out off the carpets and off the floor, and it's a lot quicker, a lot more effective than using a brush. Possibly, we don't know, but that's the thinking point there. Okay, moving on. So technology and jobs. Now, what you'll find throughout this whole course is there's a lot of overlap between topics. Now, I've talked a lot already, if you watch the preceding videos, about like the replacement of jobs by robots and automation. And that's something that is only going to become more of a thing. More and more jobs like that we don't even know about will be replaced by AI. I mean, not even robots. Like, robots imply like a physical manifestation of something, but AI, or AGI as it's now becoming known as, which is artificial general intelligence, like that's going to be much more of a huge sort of synthetic brain thing where like jobs will actually be replaced. That's almost going to be the next change that we're going to see coming along, definitely in your lifetimes, will be the replacement of sort of human brain performance with AGI, where we have actually not just smart machines, but actually like what's called like synthetic brains. Like they are decision making devices which can actually perform the same sort of operations as a human brain. So as that develops, then we're going to have the problem of well, okay, sure. So what's going to happen to people in their jobs? Tesla are developing the Tesla bot. And I mean, the intention of that will be, so I'd imagine, so that then these bots can work in the factories and they can like make production even faster. And there might be a domestic setting where you could then like have one in your home and it would sort of do the cleaning and all that kind of thing. So that all these things will happen. Now then there's a question. So what are people then going to actually do if we're replacing us with these robotic automatons? What are humans going to do? So that begs the question then, what can we then employ our brains to do? So yeah, there's going to be a massive shift coming. So then the other thing to think of, which designers need to be aware of, is cultural effects of design. So often design is adopted in very different ways around the world. Great example is if you look at McDonald's, and it sounds like a ridiculous example, but McDonald's, when you look at their menus around the world, you see quite different items that you can't get in other countries around the world. And you can Google, like, there'll be infographics showing like which McDonald's products can you only get in certain countries, because certain countries are mainly vegetarian, or certain products just won't, excuse the pun, won't bite in certain other cultures. So it's just like it's really interesting when you see these comparisons. Like the stuff that you can get in Malaysian McDonald's is very different to what you get in, like, say, Norway. Because they have to cater for different tastes there. And so cultural effects, it's important that designers are really aware of how design could be adopted differently around the world. Now, I'll just put some images on here. Sort of, I mean, these are patterns, but like, what do we associate these patterns with? What are our assumptions? Now, sort of very simply, like here we've got a sort of Polynesian, like Pacific Ocean style sort of pattern that islanders, Samoans and Fijians and people will often use patterns like these, which represent something. I don't know what they represent, but this is a pattern. I mean, having been to Fiji myself, this is a pattern you see in a lot of. It's very prevalent around the islands there. This is more of a sort of a Norse, Scandinavian, or sort of Viking-y style knot pattern, which, okay, is not so used now, but like if you go to those countries, you'll see these patterns used a lot. And same, this is what we call Celtic. So this is, you'd see a lot in like Ireland, in Wales, in Scotland, and it's a symbol that you see around a lot in those areas. And then this is obviously for China, and I mean, you see these symbols everywhere around Hong Kong. But you wouldn't see these everywhere around, say, the UK, and vice versa. You wouldn't see Celtics. I don't think I've ever seen a Celtic symbol around Hong Kong anywhere. So these are the kind of things we need to be aware of, and also colours, like how colours are adopted. So obviously, white in Chinese culture means something very different, or is associated with something very different to white in the UK. Where, say, white in the UK is often associated with weddings and sort of marriage and ceremony like that, whereas in Chinese, from my very, very, very ignorant point of view and understanding, but in Chinese culture, feel free to complain and say I'm wrong. But my understanding is that it relates more to sort of funerals, people passing on afterlife and things like that. So if you gave someone lilies in China, that would be something that you bring to, say, a funeral or a memorial or something like that. Whereas in the UK, you give lilies at weddings, or you see them a lot at weddings. So they're very, very different how these things are interpreted, and it would be a massive faux pas to sort of get it wrong, right? So that's why we have to be so sensitive, and we have to understand what these cultural differences are. Another one is obviously religious aspects. Now, obviously, these symbols here have been used in all sorts of non-religious contexts, whether it's to promote a certain agenda or whether it's through ignorance or whatever. Like, I mean, the swastika is probably one of the most commonly misinterpreted symbols, because obviously it's associated with two very strong things. Now, if you are, or if you associate yourself with Buddhism or Jainism, the swastika, or even Hinduism, like the swastika is a very, very commonly seen symbol. Like, I myself have been to Tibet. Like, I've seen this swastika on temples everywhere, like all around the sort of Buddhist monasteries and stuff. You see that everywhere, and yeah, but then you look through history and you suddenly see historical regimes which have then used that symbol. I'm not sure why, but they've used that symbol for their own sort of ideology, which is very odd when we look back on it. So yeah, we can. There's a lot of things like this where we see these around, and I mean the yin yang symbol there as well. Like, that's used for a lot of things that have nothing to do with the actual context for which it was originally intended. So yeah, like these are the things that we have to be very aware of as well. Is like, are we using a symbol that actually has very, very strong connotations to something? It'd be incredibly ignorant of a designer to design something with I don't know, like the swastika on it, and get the colors wrong on it or something, or put it on a big T-shirt without it being used in the right context. It could be highly offensive if you wore that somewhere else around the world. So going to colors, I mean, like I was saying with the white and the white and how it's used around the world. Another one is, okay, this is a very UK-centric example, but it's just because that's where I'm from. It's a bit easier for me to explain. But in the UK, like, even political divisions aren't. In fact, most politics around the world are divided by color as well. I mean, red in the UK is associated with the sort of more the left wing, like sort of what we call Labour in the UK, and red is also a colour associated with communism. And you look back through history, you don't have to go far to see that is the case through many countries. Whereas blue, on the other hand, is in the UK is more towards the Conservatives. And sorry, that's a very outdated picture there. That's the ex-Prime Minister Theresa May. But yeah, blue is the colour of what we call the Tories in the UK, so the Conservatives, like that. That's their colour that they use, and Republicans and Democrats in the US are the same. Although I can't speak for myself because I can't remember which way around the colours work there. But yeah, and Hong Kong has very clearly its own sort of colour representation depending on which political standing you have. So again, that's something we have to be aware of. Now, the next ones are quite interesting because we start getting into the more of the sort of modern cultural associations we have, and the sort of what we call the subcultures that exist that will adopt things very differently depending on what their own personal beliefs and values are, and that's fine. That whether it's colors or symbols or music or whatever, like there's all sorts of things. They're all adopted in very different ways. I mean, a great example of this is I heard a story once of, I think it was in New York, of a Buddhist Vietnamese family that lived in a house in New York, and next to the house there's this sort of unused plot of land that was just a wasteland, and it had loads of like rubbish all over it, and people would deliberately come and sort of just dump rubbish there, and it became this real like horrible waste zone. Anyway, the family that lived next door to it suddenly had this idea of, instead of like they tried to get the council to intervene. The council were like, no, sorry, there's nothing we can do. It's private land. It's just they've not done anything with it. So what this family actually did was they got a statue of the Buddha, and they then put that statue in the middle of this plot of land. And what was so interesting was that suddenly all the rubbish dumping stopped, and over time, like gradually the rubbish was removed, and then suddenly and this was from the family having done nothing other than just put that there. Suddenly the rubbish was taken away and it was cleared away, and then flowers started being put down there, and then suddenly you got like little sort of donations and offerings and things, and then incense was lit there, and then you suddenly see just every now and then groups of people would turn up, and they would just sort of come in, and they would pray in front of the statue, and then they would leave again, and suddenly what was this wasteland was turned in completely accidentally turned into this shrine that was very well looked after, to the point where it became so famous that there was actually foreign tourists would fly into New York I think, don't quote me on this because I can't remember if it was New York or not, but they'd fly into this city where they would actually then go specifically to see this shrine, which is crazy. And that's a great example of how a foreign artifact is used, and then the result is it has this massive effect on society completely accidentally. So when you're looking at, say, these pictures here, I mean, you guys, I have no idea who this person is. This person here is from my generation in terms of music's rapper called 50 Cent. And when you look at people and the way that they dress, you can sort of fairly, without stereotyping, you can make a reasonable estimation as to what their belief, and this is what we humans do actually without even meaning to. We look at people and we automatically start building a picture in our heads of what we think those people believe in and what their cultural associations are. And if you were to look at these images and think, right, well, what music do you think these people are into? It's up to you. You can decide. But I know what I think, but it's up to you to decide. But this is the thing that we go with, and design has the same effect. So we can move on with this. So Adidas is a very interesting example, because back in the 80s, Adidas was just a sort of regular run-of-the-mill sports brand. There was a rap group called Run DMC. They suddenly loved Adidas. They wanted to wear they always wore Adidas tracksuits, full tracksuits, Adidas superstars. And Run DMC became massively popular in the 80s as a rap group, and to the point where then Adidas sort of became they became the celebrity that endorsed Adidas, to the point where everyone that went to Adidas gigs and concerts were wearing all-star trainers, superstar trainers, tracksuits, and Adidas suddenly was catapulted into this realm of being not just a sports brand, but it became like a hip-hop culture brand as well. Then and I would argue it even still sticks a bit now. Even Adidas still has a sort of slightly hip-hoppy urban association with it as well. Another one is so funny is Clarks. Clarks for me in the UK is like a really boring school shoe brand. It's the sort of brand that your mum would take you to get you the biggest, clunkiest, most horrible, embarrassing pair of school shoes, which you just don't want to wear. But in Jamaica and the West Indies generally, it's like the height of cool, because they make this shoe called the Desert Boot, and it's crazy popular, and to the point where there's a dancehall artist who wrote a song about it. In fact, there's been multiple songs about Clark's shoes. And so if you watch this video here, it's actually really funny, because you see it's just, for me, I find it funny because that's not my association with Clark's. Whereas clearly if you go to, say, Jamaica, Clark's will be everywhere. And it's a real status symbol. There's another rap group called Wu-Tang Clan who one of the rappers' nicknames was Wally Champ, because that's the Clark's wallaby. And he loved Clark so much that they actually called him and the wallaby particularly, so they called him Wally Champ was his nickname. And again, he rapped about how much he loved Clarks and stuff. So it's really interesting how these things happen with design. You can innocently design a product and then it will get completely taken in a different direction. That's why when we design stuff, we often don't really know how it's going to be used. And when we say how it's going to be used, how it's actually going to be adopted into like people's groups of lives around the world differently. That's really the point. That's what's so interesting about it. It's such an amazing thing, really, about how things are adopted differently. The last thing as well with societal effects is, is design exclusionary or is it inclusionary? Like one of the huge things that people of my parents' generation struggle with is adoption of technology. Now, my generation, yeah, like we're quite an interesting one, really, because we're the hybrids. We were the ones who were born without tech. We lived for a good decade or so, really, without tech. And then we transitioned over into then living with tech, and now to the point where tech is completely absorbed into our lives. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. Whereas obviously your generation, you were born into this stuff. So ever since you were really aware and independent, you were probably using this stuff already. So it's a very interesting sort of change. Whereas people of my parents' generation, they lived the majority of all of their youth without this stuff. And so for them, adopting it is a lot harder. So with this, it's very easy for older people to feel excluded from society and feel like they just can't engage with it. And it's really hard to sort of feel like they're part of it. And so it can create an exclusionary element to society, which again we have to be aware of. So that's where Apple would say, well, their main thing is ease of use and friendliness, and they would argue that their operating system on iPhones is the easiest one to use and it's the most naturally intuitive. And you can teach an old person, you could teach your grandma to use it, and she would get the hang of it after a while. So tech, that's the good thing, really, is that tech is becoming easier and easier and easier to use. Tech back in when I was a kid was clunky, horrible, and even worse for my parents' generation. That was the generation where they feared technology because often it went really wrong. If you bought a computer, you could actually wreck the whole thing if you did something wrong. So, and that's why my dad now is still very, very nervous when he uses technology, because he's always convinced he's going to do something like break it or something like that. So it's very interesting how different age groups of society adopt things as